Breaking news. Shedeur Sanders has confirmed shocking sabotage claims after the Browns waived his entire offensive line following the Rams game. Fans and analysts are stunned, with many calling this one of the wildest moves in recent NFL memory. Is this the start of a major fallout in Cleveland? Or something even bigger behind the scenes? Watch the full story now, and don't forget to subscribe for daily sports and celebrity drama updates. What if I told you Shedeur Sanders was never given a fair shot? Not just overlooked, but set up to fail. Because what happened during that preseason game wasn't just a bad night or growing pains. It felt a lot more like something deeper, something planned. And once you see the full picture, it's hard to unsee it. Let's talk facts. 4 of the 5 offensive linemen protecting Shedeur in that game were waived within 24 hours. Gone. Just like that. The same guys who couldn't hold a block, who crumbled under pressure, they weren't even intended to make the final roster. So if this was a real competition, why was he the one stuck behind them? Meanwhile, the coach is out here publicly denying that it was sabotage? Come on. Anyone watching with 2 eyes could see this wasn't about development. It was about keeping him in check. They gave Shedeur no offensive help, no first-team reps, no chemistry, no protection. And then the media headlines rolled out. He only threw for 14 yards. He took 5 sacks. Flacco's still ahead of him. Really? How are we calling it a quarterback battle when only one quarterback stepped onto the field? With a setup that looked like it came out of a loss prevention manual? And here's the kicker. Shedeur never complained, never cried foul. He just owned it, every sack, every mistake, like a pro, like a leader. But the real story, the one the networks won't touch, this might not have been a bad performance. It could have been a brilliant execution of a quiet takedown. And once you hear what they stripped away from him before that game even started, you'll see why so many believe it was never meant to be fair. Let's get into it. Was Shedeur Sanders really competing for a job? Or was he thrown into a situation he was meant to lose? Because what happened in that preseason game wasn't just rough, it felt like sabotage. And once you break down what was going on behind the scenes, it becomes painfully clear. He never stood a chance. Let's start here. 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen protecting Shedeur waived by the Browns in less than 24 hours. Let that sink in. They surrounded him with practice squad bodies, gave him no chemistry, and called full-speed plays like this was a championship rep, not a fair evaluation. Then, after everything blew up on the field, the narrative quickly became, he's not ready. He couldn't handle the pressure. Sound familiar? But what they don't want to talk about is why he looked that way. Why wasn't he given any first-team reps? Why were his top receivers and weapons pulled from the lineup just before kickoff? This wasn't just a rocky start. It looked like a takedown in plain sight. And the more you dig, the more obvious it becomes. No one wanted Shedeur to thrive that night. But what happened after that game? That's what really shocked everyone. Let's break it down. If you want proof that Shedeur Sanders was set up to fail, look no further than the offensive line that stood in front of him. 4 out of 5 of those linemen waived. Gone within 24 hours of the game. That's not a coincidence. That's a message. How can you say this was a real quarterback evaluation when your entire protection scheme is made up of players you'd already written off? That's not giving someone a shot. That's putting them in harm's way. And that's exactly what happened. They threw Shedeur into live action behind a collapsing pocket. No backup plan, no adjustments, no protection. As if that wasn't enough, even the tight end he was paired with also waived. Everyone he suited up with that night was being phased out. It's like putting a man in a gunfight with a slingshot, and then turning around and judging his aim like it was somehow his fault. If this were really a battle to see who deserves a roster spot, wouldn't you at least put the kid in a position to show what he can do with real support? Apparently not. Because from how the lineup was built, it didn't look like they wanted to see him win. It looked like they wanted him wiped off the board. Next, let's talk about the man pulling the strings, Coach Kevin Stefanski. After the backlash started rolling in, Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski stepped up to the mic and tried to calm the noise. He swore there was no sabotage and that every player was being developed fairly. According to him, Shedeur just didn't perform. Simple as that. But here's the problem. Nothing about this situation was simple. Shedeur didn't receive a single rep with the first or second team offense. Not one. Yet he was expected to deliver NFL-level results, with fourth-string linemen and receivers who wouldn't even survive cut day. Is that how you develop a quarterback? Meanwhile, veteran QBs like Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett, they didn't even touch the field and are still sitting comfortably on the roster. Somehow, they're safe. But Shedeur's job is already being questioned after one badly managed appearance. Even Dylan Gabriel, the other QB being compared to him, ran plays with better units. He wasn't buried behind backups. He wasn't surrounded by guys already being released. So why was Shedeur? If this was really a fair competition, why wasn't he given the same circumstances as the others? Why are we calling it a battle when one side came armed and the other showed up blindfolded? Stefanski may say it wasn't personal, but to everyone watching, it looked deliberate. And before kickoff even happened, they were already stripping Shedeur of the tools he'd need to survive. As if the weak offensive line wasn't enough, Shedeur Sanders walked into that preseason game with half his toolbox missing. His chemistry receivers? Pulled. His tight end? Waived. Even Gage Larvadane, one of his most reliable targets in camp? Gone. You can't build rhythm with people you've never thrown to. You can't showcase talent when your playmakers are stripped away hours before kickoff. And yet, this was the exact position Shedeur was put in. So let's ask the obvious. How is any quarterback supposed to succeed like that? You wouldn't drop a rookie running back into a third-string offensive line and judge his future off a few 3-yard runs. So why did they do that to Shedeur? Instead of setting him up to compete, they cut the legs out from under him before he even hit the field. This wasn't just about the stakes of the game. It was the message behind the lineup decisions. The coaching staff sent a clear signal. We'll see what he can do, but not with the tools he needs to win. It's like loading a fight in your favor, then acting surprised when your opponent doesn't land a punch. You don't have to protect a franchise quarterback in preseason, but if this was really a fair shot, why did they strip everything away right before kickoff? And what if that was the whole point? From the outside, all of this might look like typical preseason football. Rookies get limited reps. Coaches evaluate. Guys sink or swim. But when you really look at how everything was handled, it starts to feel strategic. Like this wasn't random at all. Shedeur wasn't just given fewer reps. He was put in a position that practically guaranteed failure. No chemistry with the offense. No live reps with starters. No opportunity to build any rhythm. And the second it went sideways, the narrative was ready to go. He's not ready. He's overhyped. Just another name living off daddy's legacy. Funny how fast the spin kicked in, isn't it? And here's where things get even more calculated. If Shedeur had balled out, the Browns would have a full-blown media storm. Expectations, hype, pressure to keep him on the depth chart. But if he flopped under these conditions, they could quietly cut him. No headlines, just shrinking visibility. No team wants a PR problem in the preseason. So what if the plan wasn't to compete, but to manage the exit? It's a classic move in the business side of sports. Let a player bury himself so you don't have to. Of course, nothing here is confirmed. But when the lineup, the reps, and the narrative all seem to align, it doesn't feel like mismanagement. It feels like choreography. Let's be real. Not everyone wants to see a young quarterback come into the league with swagger, control, and a last name like Sanders. Shedeur doesn't hide behind media training. He speaks his mind. He controls his brand. He walks with legacy and confidence. To some people within the NFL world, that's not inspiring. It's threatening. And for players like Shedeur, confidence is often mistaken for ego. Swagger gets labeled as entitlement. So when you hand that type of player a brutalized O-line, raw receivers, and zero chemistry on a national stage, it's not just about football anymore. It becomes a message. You're not above the grind. You haven't earned anything yet. Let's see you work from the bottom. There's this unspoken rule in the NFL: earn your stripes the hard way or get cut trying. And while that might work for some prospects, it gets used as an excuse to punish others, especially those who didn't come in the traditional way. Was Shedeur's early opportunity really about evaluation? Or was it about putting him in his place before he gained any real momentum? Because from how it looked, this wasn't a test of talent. It was a test of humility. And the setup made sure the deck was stacked brutally against him. But what came next? That's what turned everything upside down. If the goal was to rattle him, it didn't work. Instead of calling out the coaching decisions, complaining about the lack of help, or blaming others for the disaster on the field, Shedeur Sanders took full responsibility. He didn't dodge the tough questions. He didn't shift the narrative. He looked straight at the media and owned every mistake. All those sacks? They're definitely on me. That line hit different, not because it was accurate, but because it showed exactly the kind of accountability that most rookies and even some veterans fail to show when the heat's on. He didn't have to say that. Everyone watching saw how bad his protection was. We saw the routes collapsing, the chaos unfolding. But Shedeur still placed the weight on his own shoulders. That's what leaders do. And more importantly, it's what the people trying to knock him down didn't expect. They wanted frustration. They wanted attitude. They wanted something they could spin into a "he's not coachable" story. Instead, Shedeur came out composed, professional, focused. No drama, no excuses, just growth. If anything, the way he handled the loss showed more football maturity than the play calling that led to it. So now the pressure shifts. Because if he passed the character test, what excuse is left to keep holding him down? What happened to Shedeur Sanders isn't just about one badly managed preseason game. It's part of a bigger problem. Because for years, we've seen this same pattern repeat in the NFL. A young, talented black quarterback comes in with confidence, promise, and a target already painted on his back. This system gives him a chance, but quietly stacks the deck against him behind closed doors. Minimal reps, rotating teammates, no consistent support. Then, when things go sideways, the media steps in to finish the job. He's not ready. He's overhyped, too flashy, not focused. It happened to Cam, to Lamar, to Fields, and now we're watching it unfold again. Does every team operate this way? Of course not. But when a quarterback like Shedeur refuses to play small, when he carries a brand, a name, and knows his own value, some parts of the league don't see that as a strength. They see it as a threat. And if they can't control your image, they'll try to control your narrative. That's what makes Shedeur's situation feel less like a preseason struggle and more like a quiet campaign to keep him from rising too fast. Because for underdogs like him, it's not just about talent. It's about whether the system actually wants to see you win. By the time the final whistle blew, most people had already made up their minds. Shedeur Sanders had a bad game, period. But now that you've seen the full picture, the waived linemen, missing playmakers, no first-team reps, and impossible conditions, you have to step back and ask, was this really a fair shot or a quiet takedown disguised as development? When a quarterback is thrown into chaos and then blamed for not making magic happen, we shouldn't just accept it as part of the game. Because it's rarely just about performance. Sometimes it's about perception, politics, power. They didn't just limit Shedeur's tools. They tried to limit the narrative. But what they didn't count on? His response. He didn't fold. He didn't beg. He owned every part of the game, even the mistakes that weren't really his to carry. That kind of poise, under that kind of pressure, says more about his future than any preseason stat line ever could. So now the spotlight shifts away from him and back onto those calling the shots. Because it's not just about Shedeur's performance, it's about the system surrounding him. The real question isn't how Shedeur played, it's whether he was ever truly allowed to. And that's a conversation the league won't be able to ignore much longer.